Children are known for their vivid imaginations and fantasies, so let me begin by saying that I was no ordinary child. According to my parents and every other adult relative that I've asked about this, I was never one to make up stories or ever exaggerate. Even at the age of 6, I was very soft-spoken and serious. I feel like this is vital to point out, not to win over credible brownie points or anything like that. This story isn't so thrilling anyway, but it is true. My father was in the military, and since birth, I've moved around and have lived in about 3 different countries and many states in the United States. At the age of 5, my father was stationed in Korea, so my mother and I moved there. I recall very many things about my experiences there, like I was always being gawked at by the people there because of my huge green eyes. They loved to crowd around and stare, and ask me how to say a certain word in English. I became good friends with a young Korean girl about my age named Sun Yu. That's how it was pronounced, but I'm not sure how it's spelled. One afternoon, we were playing at Sun Yu's house. Her house was very small, and there was a separate outhouse that was made up of 4 close together rotted wood walls and a rectangular hole in the floor where you did your business in. I avoided it completely, for fear of falling into the dark hole of stench. Sun Yu and I decided to trade clothes. She in my red jumpers and Smurf shirt, and I in her bright Korean dress. We were playing hide and seek around her house, and I was the hider. I slipped into this very large garage, crammed between 2 houses in the neighborhood. After waiting for about 10 minutes, I really had to pee like a racehorse, so I lifted up the dress and went right there on the floor amid the old boxes and storage items. There was a very large door, but it was locked shut and rusted over. So the only way anyone would have gotten in this was a very slim area that was less than a foot wide. Only someone with a child-thin body could slide through. When I was done and about to get up, I heard a clanking noise in front of me, and I looked up, all the way. My neck would bend, and saw a rusty armored knight walking towards me slowly, holding an axe. As I recall, this knight was at least 8 feet tall, but considering I was only 5 and squatting on the floor, it must have looked much taller than it was. Knights were something I've only seen in pictures and books, and I recall every detail of its suit and axe. My instincts told me to get the hell out, and at first, I fell hard on my knees and awkwardly tried to crawl behind some boxes with my panties still around my ankles. I didn't have to look to know it was coming towards me. I could hear heavy footsteps, and I jumped on my feet and made a mad dash towards the only thin way out. I slammed my right side into the knight. I felt it as real as anything else. This memory is like a dream, but it wasn't a dream, because I still have Sun Yu's dress that I was wearing to this day, and there still is the rusty scratch marks that are on the right side of the dress. When I recall this whole event, I'm watching myself from an outer perspective, and it plays by like in slow motion underwater movements. This isn't exactly scary, but to me it is, because the memory of it feels more real than anything that has ever happened to me. I don't know why I was a knight of all things, but ever since then, I've been terrified of knights and anything medieval. Thanks for reading. This event actually happened 3 years ago. My family and I went to the Philippines for a 2-week vacation. My aunt, who is the richest in the family, was rebuilding the house where my other aunt, some cousins, and grandmother lived at. That's where we originally were going to stay at, but it was under construction, so my aunt let us stay at her vacation house with her. The house was nice, and it was large enough to fit almost 8 or less people. It looked pretty new too, but my aunt told me that the house was very old, back to the time of World War II. I was pretty surprised because it looked so new and everything. The only thing on my mind was I wish this was my house, and if you knew what my house looked like, you'd say the same thing. That's how beautiful it looked. But I soon found out. There was terror inside, waiting to be let loose. It all started when we were watching TV. We were watching some movie about Japanese invasion on an island, with mass murder and all that. I wasn't really into it, and we all found out I wasn't the only one who wasn't either. The TV started to flicker in and out. All of a sudden, we hear this battle go on, but we didn't know what it was about because there was no picture at all. But how can we still hear things? I wasn't freaked out at that point until someone whispered, "Get out." We all looked at each other, but my brother ruined it and started laughing, saying it was only the movie, that the TV must have been broken or something. That did not convince me at all, but it seemed to work on everyone else, so I went back to normal because of that. It was almost midnight, and everyone was starting to go to bed. Of course, we were all able to get a room to ourselves. It had 8 in there, but me and my little cousin decided to sleep in the same room because I was too freaked out to even sleep by myself. I was so embarrassed to ask her, but who cares, just as long as I have someone with me, right? Well, we weren't that tired, so we decided to just listen to music. So we were just listening to music and talking, when all of a sudden, I hear this piano music. Of course, I became suspicious. I always think of the worst. So I told my cousin, "I hope that was your CD." And she says, "Girl, chill." And she starts to head out of the room. I stop her because I don't even want to find out what it was, but she insisted on going, and I didn't want to stay in the room alone, so I went along with her. It turned out that there was a piano in the family room. We really didn't see that room because my aunt said not to go downstairs, and creepily, it was down there. So my cousin Madeline goes to it and finds a slipper. She just flat out starts laughing, and I join her until I hear footsteps, so I told her to come on because my aunt would kill us if we were up. So we head back to our room, and a slipper slaps her in the head. It was like it just flew out of nowhere. I had just about enough of this, and went to my Aunt Paris. I tried to wake her up, but found everyone else in the room with her. They all start confessing about anything that just happened to them. My Aunt Paris got pinched in the ear, my grandmother's hair was cut, and the rest they just heard sounds that freaked them out. So my aunt tells everyone to run outside before anything else happens, while she called my uncles. Gladly, nothing else happened to us outside. I was very, very creeped out. I've never experienced much fear before, but it was pretty funny after that because my uncles came in with bats and a bunch of other ridiculous things. I'm a very curious person, so I decided to do some research on the place, and not to my surprise, I found out that the place was actually a torture chamber for Filipinos. Back in World War II, the Japanese actually executed and killed Filipinos in that house. I guess that's what explained the upset in the house when we started watching that movie, but I really don't know if my source of information is accurate or true, but it seems like it to me. Thanks for reading. You have to excuse some of my spelling, because I'm from Australia and we spell things differently, so I'm not a bad speller, okay? This is a true story told by my friend Joe. This happened about 35 years ago to his mother. In China at the time, Joe's mom, let's call her Lisa. Lisa was living in a small house, and their toilet was situated outside of their little home. Lisa lived with her mom and dad. Lisa shared a bed with her mom and dad, but the dad slept in his own, but all three slept in the same small room. Lisa was scared of a ghost, as in China, it was quite common for people to believe in those types of things. The worst thing you can do in a situation like that was to go to the toilet at night, lighting a candle, then walk all the way outside in the dark. Since there are so many trees out there could be anything potentially hiding behind it. In China, people believe that a spirit is surrounded by some fireballs. It sounds ridiculous, but it's true. One night, Lisa thought she saw a fireball gleaming on the corner of her eye, but being only 10 years old, she was so frightened she ran back to her house forgetting to go to the toilet. After that night, she closed her eyes when walking to the toilet. One day she found a large knife under her pillow, so she asked her mom why it was there. Her mom told her it was a protection from anything evil. Being in a superstitious culture, she didn't question anyone. Probably about 30 years after that, she and her mom somehow got into the topic of the knife that used to be under Lisa's pillow. This time her mother told her the truth. The reason was because there was a lady in white, with long hair, who used to sit next to Lisa while she was sleeping and pat her hair over and over. Hope you enjoyed this story. I hope it wasn't too long. Thanks for reading. Ever since I can remember, there was this guy who lived up in the woods across from my house. He was sort of screwed up from serving 3 tours in Vietnam, but he was a really nice guy. About 5 years ago, he got in financial trouble and the bank took his house. Shortly afterwards, his wife divorced him, and to make a long story short, his life went to hell. Turns out, he ended up living in this tent-like thing year-round. He was in every sense an alcoholic, and he had pretty much given up on life. A couple of winters ago, the temperature was below zero for like 3 months or so. I remember driving home from work and seeing him all bundled up, sitting on the side of the road playing solitaire. He always played solitaire. You could almost always hear him at night, screaming out, I guess from his flashbacks, but that's the only way that I knew that he hadn't frozen to death. Well, after about 2 months, the cold caught up with him. The state police found him frozen solid up on the hill, about 75 yards from my house. This past summer I was driving home from work at like 12:45 a.m. or something, and just as I put my signal on to turn into my driveway, I saw someone seated on the side of the road, covered in blankets, looking down at the road. I drove past, not really paying attention to them, but asking myself why we were all bundled up. For God's sakes, it was 80-something degrees outside. Then I realized who it was. I slammed on the brakes and threw the car into reverse. I backed up about 15 yards and looked frantically into the field behind where he sat, thinking maybe he took off running. I saw nothing, but I did notice that the grass on which he was seated was not all matted down and showed no signs of being depressed in any way. My cousin, who I didn't tell this to until like last month, had experienced the same thing in late August. He was afraid that anyone would think he was crazy. We kept it a secret between us, and we probably always will. Thanks for reading. I thought I'd send you a story my mom told me about last night. This was sometime back when I was just a small boy, and I barely remember what took place. However, I do remember the event. This happened sometime early during the Vietnam War, and one night, my mother awoke feeling cold and clammy, as she put it. She said she was just lying there in bed without opening her eyes, but she started having this weird feeling that someone else was in the room with her. She opened her eyes, and when she peered to the end of the bed, she saw her younger brother standing there smiling. She called out his name calmly and asked what he was doing there. This in turn woke my father, who swears he awoke hearing her brother say, "I've come to say goodbye, sis." My mother started to sit up and saw her brother smiling and then just vanished before her eyes. My father, now fully awake, looked at the clock and saw it said about 1:20 a.m. in the morning. They could not get back to sleep. My mother felt something awful had happened to her brother. At around 4:30 p.m. the next day, the army drove up, and a captain got out and walked up to the door. At this point, my mother knew right then and there what was about to be said and started crying hysterically. They were told that my uncle had died yesterday when he jumped off a tank and landed on a mine. The weird thing is, because of the time difference and about the time they had said he died, my dad figured it would be about 1:20 a.m. our time. I'm not sure what to make of all of this, but what do you make of this anyway? Gives me a weird feeling myself, and thank you for reading my story. As a teen, me and many of the others in our church youth group spent a lot of time hanging out in the oldest cemetery here in town. It wasn't exactly appropriate behavior for church kids, but we weren't there to vandalize, just to hang out and spook each other. After a while, the novelty wore off, and it was simply a peaceful place to take a walk undisturbed. Of course, it was usually late at night, long after we'd run out of constructive things to do. We did all sorts of stupid things to scare each other, hoping the girls would draw a little closer, I guess. Lots of little things happened during those times, mostly due to our own imaginations, I'm sure. I remember one time when my girlfriend and I were walking through the area at night. We were the only ones there, as far as we knew. We both had an uneasy feeling that perhaps tonight wasn't a good night to be there. It seems that at every corner, something in the nearest bush or tree would shake the branches. It wasn't a windy night. The moon was bright enough to see clearly. No people. The final straw came when something fell out of the tree, about 12 feet down in front of us. Whatever it was, it rattled the branches, then hit the ground like a small sack of flour. Then it scurried off through the autumn leaves. Probably a cat, but it was enough to get us to leave. Odd night that one was. Being an old cemetery with all manner of crypts and stones, it was easy to get spooked. There was one time we were convinced we could see a pair of feet in the shadows, always about 100 feet away, with everything from the ankles up shrouded in darkness. It started as a joke, but we could swear we saw those feet everywhere we went in the cemetery that night. Little things, stupid things, scary things. One night after romping in our playground, I was driving everyone home. We had about 6 people in the car. We stopped and started talking about our personal experiences. Although I personally have not experienced anything to the best of my knowledge, ghostly phenomena, the stories that 2 of my friends told me that night caused me to sleep with my Bible under my pillow that night. Let me introduce Julie. She is a very interesting person, very bubbly and quite funny. She told me the following story. She was crying by the end, having never told anyone before. She was shaking, completely terrified to be recalling it. When she was younger, perhaps 13 or so, she lived in Ottawa. She had a best friend, but had never been in her friend's room before. One day she went to visit. Her friend's mother said she's upstairs, just go up to her room. She did. Her friend was in the room, so she just walked in and sat on the foot of the bed. All at once, she started to hear voices around her asking for help. Hollow voices, children, women, men, echoing all around her. Please help us. She doesn't know why, but she felt very sad and started to cry. Just then, her friend walked in. Julie looked at her friend and asked one simple question. Do you just sit here and cry at night? At that, the friend seemed to be pushed out of the room, across the narrow hallway, and pressed up against the wall. Julie went out to the hall, and her friend looked her in the eye and said, "Don't ever talk to me about what just happened." Then they left. Julie never returned to that room and never discussed it with her friend again. In fact, she never told anyone until she told us in the car that night. Meet another friend of mine, Paul. Paul was the son of our pastor, a Pentecostal minister. His family had been missionaries in Bangkok, Thailand prior to moving to our city. In fact, Paul had done a lot of his growing up over there. Now, Bangkok is a very large hotspot of demonic activity. When they first moved there, they were able to buy a very nice, by Bangkok standards, house for an incredibly low price. They soon found out why. It was a 2-story house. Quite often at night, they would hear tapping at the bedroom windows on the 2nd floor. Sometimes they'd hear screaming and wailing too. There were no trees close enough to be doing the tapping, although I suppose you could chalk it up to pranksters. The local people wouldn't go near the place though. When the father was away during the day, the kids and the mother would hear all sorts of strange voices and sounds. Now, out in the backyard of these houses, there is often a spirit house. I'm not completely sure of the reasoning behind them, but I suspect the idea is to build a house for the evil spirits to inhabit so they'll leave yours alone. In any case, it emitted an incredible feeling of depression and evil. Finally, one day, when the mother and daughter, Paul's sister, were home alone, they walked out into the yard and said a simple prayer, then ordered the demons to leave. They did. Prior to this simple exorcism, an event took place that left my friend extremely scared. It did a number on me too. One night, my friend was in his room, having a heck of a time trying to fall asleep. The rest of the family were sound asleep. Suddenly, he heard the front door open then close downstairs. He froze. Listening instantly, he heard footsteps coming across the floor down there. Then they were coming up the stairs. He was terrified and tried to yell for his dad, but nothing came out. No matter what he did, he couldn't get out of bed or make any sounds. The footsteps stopped outside his room and the door began to open. All he could do was watch. Now, up to this point, I'm thinking this has to be a burglar or someone playing a prank, but the door opens fully and something takes a step into the room. Paul told me this part with a look of utmost fear on his face. The thing standing in his doorway was actually darker than the room itself was. It was as if it was absorbing all the light around it. He said it stood about 7 feet tall and was very broad. There were no features or limbs to be seen, except for the eyes. They were deep dark red. Blood red, he said. The thing just stood there looking at him. He pulled the covers over his head and started repeating the name Jesus over and over again. Interestingly enough, that was the one word he could say out loud at that point. The door slammed and he looked back. It was gone. He was able to move and speak again and called for his parents. They hadn't seen it, but they believed him. In both of these stories, the thing that convinced me was this. They both became extremely terrified with the retelling of what happened. They were quite uneasy about it, and I admit I had to do a lot of prodding. Neither of these people were known to tell stories like this, so thank you for reading. This is a story that I just heard, and I wanted to tell the experience before I forget it. I heard it last night, while camping with a friend and her family. A little background. Jennifer and her parents are of Chinese descent. Sue, her mom, has a lot of good true ghost stories that she told us last night. A couple of years ago, before I met Jennifer, she and her family were living in Abu Dhabi, a place in the United Emirates, because her dad was working there along with a lot of other foreigners, all working for the same company. All employees lived in a high-rise apartment building, and Jen and her family were on the 8th floor of the building. Her room had a big door-sized window, but no balcony, just an enormously huge iron safety bar surrounding the window. At the time, there was a construction crew who were doing something outside, and she had a view of the trailer the crew stayed in. So here's the first part of the story. It was New Year's Eve in Abu Dhabi, and there was a big party at the building with all the company workers. People were drinking and having a great time, and Dominic, her dad, was getting tired, and so was the family. So at about 9 p.m., they went upstairs to go to sleep. At about midnight, Dom awoke to the screaming and yelling of people. Because it was New Year's Eve, as I just stated, and there was a party going on, it made sense to hear loud noises during parties. Anyway, in the morning, all the people were gossiping about the previous night. Dom asked what all the commotion was about, so he asked the guard downstairs. It turned out, a trailer had burned to the ground the previous night, and it was the same trailer Jen could see from her window. Everybody got out unharmed except one man, a Filipino guy who apparently had a little too much to drink to celebrate the New Year. He ended up tragically burning along with the trailer. However, this was only the tip of the iceberg. Now it was the middle of July, and it was very hot in Abu Dhabi at the time, so most of the families left on vacation to go somewhere cooler. There was maybe 3 families left in the building, mostly men, because they had to work. Late one night, Dom awoke to a startling pounding noise. It sounded like someone was pounding on the windows. He ignored it, thinking maybe it was the wind or a bird or something. But when starting to hear it again, he got up, wandering through the house half asleep, tracing where the noise had come from. He walked through each of the rooms, finally coming to Jen's room. He walked cautiously to the window, suddenly feeling the hairs on the back of his neck rise, his skin breaking into goosebumps, about to draw the drapes when he realized this room is 8 stories up, even wilder. There's no balcony for a person to climb into. Instead of pulling up the drapes, he pounded on the window loudly 3 times, then opened the drapes. There was no one there, not even a bird or anything big enough to pound the window so hard. He quickly left the room and closed the door on the way out. He and Sue believe it was the spirit of the Filipino man, as he must have been in his last seconds of life, pounding on the small window of the trailer. The trailer was in full view from the bedroom window. As for Jennifer, she was as surprised to hear about it as I was. Last night was the first time she heard about it, and her parents didn't want to scare a 9-year-old girl out of her mind at night. I may have missed some details, but this is pretty much how the story goes. Sorry it's so long. If you want, I have a few more ghost stories and true legends from my area, as well as some Taiwanese stories, which were also printed in newspapers over there. If you read this far, thanks for being patient, and thanks for reading. She told me don't upload without her. She told me don't upload no mo. We know that we can't live without uploading. She knows she will never, ever give up. I can't feel my uploads when I'm with you, but I upload. But I upload. This will get demonetized because it's almost a cover, but I upload. Even if I sing to like, comment, subscribe, you will upload, and I will upload. Well, maybe you won't if you're not a content creator, but I am, but I upload. I will upload. Comment, like, and subscribe, guys. Well, this video might get demonetized, but that doesn't matter to me because I want to share this video around, make sure the views get up, and make sure the engagement is up so you guys can talk to me. I guess it's come to the point where I'm singing for your desperation so that you comment, like, and subscribe. And if I have to humiliate myself, if I have to embarrass myself for the sake of that, then by golly, I will not even do that because that sounds really horrifying and it's probably something I should tell a story about. Anyway, guys, sorry I'm being weird. Just really happy I got this video out to you guys. And it's pretty lengthy. I mean, it's not as lengthy as, say, you know, a Bee-Busta video where that's, you know, like 10 minutes, maybe 15. Or maybe, you know, a Mr. Nightmare video where that's like 5 minutes. But, I mean, it's lengthy enough. No, I'm just kidding. Those guys are awesome. I love you guys. Good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.